Jay Powell crushed the market, recession fears are back, the Fed's going to go to 6%, et cetera. What does that do to oil demand? What are you hearing?
The oil demand and the expectations for demand just bounced around between what the Fed is going to do and what China's doing. And so there have been periods when, in the last couple of months, when it was Chinese recovery was going to drive up the price of oil because demand would go up. But now with the latest news from the Fed, that again makes it seem to people that, to the market, that will end up slowing the economy and repressing demand. So it's a market that goes back and forth on the news.
So I love that description because on the one hand, about a week ago, it was like, oh, we're seeing synchronized global growth. We didn't think that was going to happen. And then now it feels like, well, maybe we will see a decoupling of growth, China versus the West.
Well, and even on Chinese growth, I mean, it goes up and down. The China's coming back strong. It's a V recovery, and then it's more spotty. It's taking longer to come back. So all of these, and the oil price and the oil market's really a derivative of what happens to GDP.
Mm-hmm. So are we just in for more volatility versus a set level? We go to 70, we go to 100?
Well, I think it is going to be volatile, responding to what happens, and whether we finally see that there is some kind of recession, what the nature of the slowdown is, or if it turned around that we really saw China coming back, hot and heavy, then at that point we'd see a stronger market. The general expectation has been in the second half of the year is when the market is going to tighten again, because at some point they will stop raising rates, and at the same time, it'll become clearer China's recovery. And at that point, we'll see that the market is more tightly balanced.
I almost wonder if the biggest risk for the market is that China demand is much stronger, considering that spare capacity, many say, is really tight.
Absolutely. That is the question, because then you would get a very tight market. And if you had the kind of growth that even, before the latest Fed thing that people were projecting, that was going to get you into a tight market. And that was going to pull up prices, and then that would also have an impact on the global economy.
That was the demand question for sure. The supply question for this year is what happens to Russia. It feels like Russian oil supply and its product are getting on the market. Whether or not it's creating inefficiencies is one thing, but it's getting on the market and it's pumping.
Yes, and absolutely. And by the way, that was the intention of the price cap from the Treasury, was to ensure that there was not a shortage of oil, because if Russian oil did not get into the market, then you would have had prices spiking again. So it was to reduce Russian revenues, but help keep Russian production up.
So it actually weirdly worked.
Yeah, the price cap has worked. I think people say it worked much better than they thought, but it's also been helped by the fact that there is some oversupply in the market, and it's been helped by the Federal Reserve.
Fair enough. When we look forward, though, I wonder, with the sanctions, there's going to be a limit to countries working in Russia. There's going to be a limit to the new technologies, et cetera. Is Russian oil production going to have to be crimped and topped out at some point?
I think the first effect is going to be, because of the importance of Western technology, capping Russian LNG development. So that's going to happen sooner. I think, there were some projections a year ago that Russian oil production would collapse quickly, but the Russians have the capabilities. And while the Western technology companies may have withdrawn as companies, the 3,000 people who work for them are still there working the fields. So I think there is going to be a decline, but it's going to be a slower decline, at least it appears at this point, because obviously the flow of investment and the flow of technology and access to equipment and so forth, but not the dramatic fall off the cliff that some projected a year ago.
It's so hard to figure out in the oil market. Do you think we get to 60 first or 100?
Oh my gosh. Both.
Okay.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that I think that, the signs are we're not going to have a major recession. Obviously, Alex, there's always the risk of the political event, the geopolitical event, something connected to the war, something happening in the Middle East that we don't see happening now that affect it. But if you look at where the market is in supply, and you look to the second half of the year, I'm not going to put a number on the price, because whatever it is, it's going to turn out to be something else. But a tightening market would pull up the price.
So that makes, but I love your answer of both, because I think that makes it really difficult for oil CEOs, for example, to be able to make solid investment decisions. And I'm wondering if the volatility in the commodity market is going to affect companies' ability in the energy transition to invest.
I think that they have had, they've done well, and the revenues, and I think you see their budgets going up. both increased budgets for E&P, although there's some inflation there that has to be dealt with as well, but also spending money on a transition. I mean, what we've heard here at CERAWeek has been really striking to me. One is we've seen the strategies, how they responded to the crisis, focus on oil and gas, but at the same time, every single company has a low carbon strategy, and there's much more clarity around the low carbon strategies this year than there were last year. And of course, a big factor in that is the IRA and the great scale of incentives that are going to be made available. In contrast, as we've heard from some of the European CEOs, minute regulations.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's the carrot and the stick thing. And clearly the companies are going to like the carrot and not the stick. Do you think that Europe's going to change their strategy?
I think it's hard for Europe to do that. They're going to try and do it, but they have 27 different countries with fiscal regimes, and it's so ingrained in their DNA to write very detailed instructions. We heard from Patrick Pouyanné from Total today that their 10-page description of on hydrogen it's very hard, impenetrable to understand. He was struggling with the vocabulary.
Yeah, no, 100%. Do you think that when people talk about the energy transition, is that the correct phrase? Should we be calling it an energy transition?
Well, I guess so, in the sense that, when I was writing the new map, everywhere I went, I heard the phrase energy transition. So I decided to say, what is an energy transition? And went back and looked at it. And the first energy transition began, and I went out on a limb, January 1709, when a British metal worker figured out you can make better iron with coal rather than wood. But all these other transitions unfolded over a year, and they were energy additions. Last year, oil overtook coal in the 1960s as the world's #1 energy resource. Last year, the world used more coal than ever before, 3 times what it used in the 1960s. This is an effort to be an energy transition, but it's so different because it's trying to do in a quarter of a century what the world did over centuries, and it's trying to do it in a much more totalistic way. So, and the scale of it and the complexity, I think, has become more apparent over the last year. It's not as simple as just a scenario or a line on a graph. It's pretty darn complex.
Energy diversity, is that the better phrase? Energy transitional diversity?
Well, some people are saying energy transformation.
Okay.
Yeah, people will search for the word. And I think even if you talk to people in the developing world, for them, energy transition has a different meaning. For them, it's 1 billion people no longer using wood and waste to cook with, but using LPG, using an oil and gas product. That for them is an energy transition.
True. Last question, and I asked this of all our guests here at CERAWeek. What's going to power my car in 10 years? Or what's going to flip on my light switch to power my car in 10 years?
Well, in 10 years, it depends, first of all, how long you're going to keep your car.
7 years?
Okay, 7 years. Okay. I think I'd say there's a 40-50% chance that you'll be driving an electric car. We'll see what happens to the metals and the minerals that are required for the energy transition. So the incentives will be pretty strong to do that. What will power your car? It will increasingly be a mixture of renewables and natural gas. The role of coal will go down. It will be too soon for the next generation of nuclear power. So I think the answer is what you said before, diversity.